By now, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that Pokemon isn't the hardest game to beat. Even more so, that some made it their mission to make becoming champion as hard as it can possibly be. Almost every core mechanic of the game has already been tinkered with, like trying to beat the game without taking any damage, or winning with every opposing trainer only having level 100 Pokemon. The keyword here being almost. The idea of Pokemon is that you, the trainer, start off with your similarly unexperienced team and both of you grow stronger throughout your journey. But what if we flip that around? What would happen if Pokemon would become weaker as the story progresses? Hi, I'm Ryo. I like to make Pokemon games harder than they have to be, and this is my journey through Pokemon Diamond, but my team evolves backwards instead. Let's quickly talk about the rules. First, we need to go over the changes my mod makes to the base game. Every evolution line has been flipped around, which means that instead of literally evolving backwards, a Machamp will evolve into a Machoke at level 28, and from there can only become a Machop via trade. This way, a lot of early stone and trade evolutions like Roserade and Golem can't just dominate the run. The second big change is that every wild and static encounter will swap with its evolutionary counterpart. In order to prevent myself from just plowing through the game with fully evolved Pokemon, I also won't be able to cancel any evolutions. To make it even harder, I also made this challenge a Hardcore Nuzlocke. Aside from the standard rules, like if a Pokemon faints, he can no longer be used, and that I can only catch the first valid encounter per route, I'm also not allowed to use any healing items in battle, have to play on set mode, and cannot overlevel the next gym leader's ace before the start of the battle. And if I ever black out, I have to restart the run. Before we start, and since this run is about evolving backwards, let me know which Pokemon you think should have never gotten a new evolution. For me, it's gotta be Hisui and Sneasel. The reason should be pretty self-explanatory. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in. The first chapter of this upside-down story starts in Twin Leaf Town. Together with my neighbor Dez, I headed over to a nearby lake where scientists apparently spotted an extremely rare red Gyarados. The only thing we found, however, were the lunatic Professor Rowan from Sand Gym Town and his young student Lucas, who were both cast out from the Pokemon Academy for conducting experiments to alter Pokemon evolutions. They have been experimenting on Sinnoh's wildlife for centuries now. Finding the shiny Gyarados would have been a big step towards their goal of changing the world forever. Fortunately, luck was not on their side this time around, so they left as fast as they showed up. This was the perfect moment to introduce myself as their new assistant from Unova without them suspecting anything about my plans to stop them. Their first mistake was to trust me. Their second mistake was to leave a suitcase full of Pokemon behind. It was time to obtain my first team member. I got to pick between Infernape, Empoleon, and Torterra. After some planning, I came to the conclusion that the monkey was probably the best choice here, considering before the Elite Four, there is only one other fire type that I can get. This immediately puts me at a disadvantage in my very first battle, because my secondary fighting type allows the opposing Staraptor to hit me for super effective damage with a wing attack. Luckily, it is only level 2 and chose Tackle instead, which means I can take it down without a problem. Great, that's already a promising start. After making my way to Sand Gym Town, I received a Pokédex from the delusional professor and was off to my journey to becoming strong enough to stop him. I also got to name my starter here and decided to go with the theme of things being backwards. Meet Epanrefni, or Pan for short. My newly found companion and I then headed straight to Jubilife City. On our way there, we fought countless trainers with fully evolved Pokemon, like Lass Natalie and her army of Bidoof. Luckily, Pan was strong enough to pull through, but I definitely should stack up on some team members to be able to reach my goal. So here is Lyra the Bibarel, who immediately proceeded to crit my Route 202 encounter, Soda the Gyarados, and Rot the Staraptor from Route 204. Since this is a regular Hardcore Nuzlocke, my encounters aren't limited by any additional rules, so I will only mention the ones that are actually being used in any shape or form throughout the run. It was time for the first rival battle. With Death's team exclusively consisting of fully evolved Pokemon, I had to be extremely careful here. Not only can his Starly easily take out my starter, but his ace Turtwig, just kidding. Soda pretty much soloed him. With that out of the way, I was able to pick up a few more encounters. The best of which has to be Luxray. A chat member over on Twitch pointed out that his name backwards sounds like an Irish person with a heavy accent trying to say Dark Souls, and I can't unhear that anymore. From there, it was straight to Orbis City, where after reminding Rourke that he has an actual job outside of looking at rocks, it was time for the first gym. Before the battle, I also picked up my missing 2 encounters, with one being Tap the Crobat and the other one being Vark the Graveler. I assume I made a mistake when making the mod, as she should actually be a Golem, but I wasn't going to fix that in this run. I then brought Pan to level 14 to get access to Mach Punch. As a result, my little starter friend unfortunately evolved, and with that lost a big chunk of his damage already. With all the preparations out of the way, it was time for the first gym. First up was Vark into Rourke's Geodude. After defense curling twice, it took my pet rock about 10 rock throws and 3 tackles to waste a potion and eventually take Geodude out. This baits Cranidos in next. Thanks to my defense boosts, its headbutt barely leaves a dent before getting a lucky flinch on Graveler. After tanking another attack, a single rock throw was enough to get my opponent below half health. Rourke then used his last potion, but Var connects once again, bringing Cranidos back down to the yellow. On the next turn, the gym leader only went for a Leer, allowing me to freely hit it for a third time and take the blue dino out for good. This also meant that Var gained enough XP to level up and learn Magnitude, which immediately high-rolled and one-shot the final Onyx. Nice, 7 more to go. My journey then brings me back to Jubilife to save the professor from a bunch of Team Galactic runs. After successfully earning his trust, I headed up north, which directly brings me to Floroma town. Here is also where I added Sir Cap the Pachirisu to my team. Team Galactic was up to no good once again, as they had kidnapped this little girl's father and locked him away in the Valley Windworks. Now that I think of it, what if they weren't attacking the professor back in Jubilife? What if they're actually working together and are hatching a plan to take over the world by devolving every Pokemon but theirs? Determined to stop them, I took out some grunts to acquire the necessary keys to enter the Windworks and face Commander Mars to hopefully find the answers to all my questions. I brought my entire team to the level cap, causing both Lyra and Dark Souls to evolve. The latter of which is actually a useful evolution because Luxor's early game move pool is very underwhelming. This way she can at least learn some proper attacks. I was ready to face the next challenge. Mars only has 2 Pokemon, but her ace Parugly is extremely strong this early in the game, considering it's fully evolved and has a pretty high speed and attack stat. This makes her one of the scariest early game bosses for Nuzlocke. What Mars didn't plan for when kidnapping this little girl's dad was that my team was equally broken. She starts the battle off with her Zubat, as I brought Vark back for more destruction. After getting badly poisoned by a Toxic, a precisely thrown rock snipes the bat right out of the sky. Parugly was out next. She only went for a soft feint attack, as a high roll Magnitude brings Mars' ace down to low health, which unfortunately also activates its Oran Berry. On the next turn, Vark shrugs off another attack before bringing her opponent down to the red. With poison consistently chipping away on Graveler's health, I decided it was best to switch her out for Pan. He tanks a weak feint attack, and from there was able to end the battle with a single Mach Punch. While not struggling against Mars was a nice change of pace, she unfortunately fled the scene before I could find out whether she was working with Rowan or not. Luckily, while being locked in with Team Galactic, the professor overheard that their plan was to steal advanced bike technology from a store in Eterna City next. This was my opportunity to find the necessary proof that will help me to lock both Team Galactic and Rowan behind bars forever. I made a short stop at Route 205 to pick up Les the Floatzel and continued my travel towards the Eterna Forest. While trying to safely guide this girl Cheryl to the other side, we accidentally ran into a Lopunny and a Roserade. This put me in front of the hardest decision of the run. Since it is a double encounter, I can choose which of the 2 I want to get. They both evolve with friendship, and because of that, could be really useful in late game if I make sure they always hate me. So, do I want the overpowered grass poison type, or the bunny with thigh highs and fluffy handcuffs? After carefully considering my options, I ultimately ended up with Razor on my team. I dropped Cheryl off in Eterna City, met the Sinnoh champion Cynthia, and picked up Mitch the Chimecho in Route 211. While fighting through the hidden gym trainers, Tab also reached level 22, and so it was time for him to downgrade as well. Overall, that left me with a pretty standard party for a Gardenia fight. With her entire team consisting of weak grass Pokemon that have little to no coverage moves, there really wasn't too much planning involved in this. I even brought Vark for good measure. The gym leader's first Pokemon was Cherubi, and so I brought out Pan to immediately take it out with a Flame Wheel. Second was Turtwig, and since I wasn't sure if I had enough damage to take it out, I went for a Taunt to prevent it from setting up Reflect. Gardenia, however, read me like a book and got in free chip damage with a Razor Leaf instead. On the next turn, a single attack was enough to send the Grassy World Turtle back to its Pokeball. Last for Gardenia was Roserade, which doesn't have a way of dealing any significant damage to Pan. Since I prevented Reflect earlier, a final Flame Wheel was enough for a clean one-shot. It's going surprisingly well so far. With the second badge in my possession, I was now qualified enough to cut down those trees and access the Team Galactic hideout. Well, it's not really a hideout, the building has spikes and all, it's pretty obvious something evil is going on in there. I made my way to the last floor, where I came across no other but Commander Jupiter. I confronted her about Professor Rowan's plans and even offered her to spare her if she could only give me the information I needed to serve justice. But she immediately challenged me to a battle. First up was Zubat, and I had no other choice but to send out Vark. Similar to my hot Pokemon challenge run, I once again forgot about Giga Drain, as this annoying bat gobbles up 50% of Graveler's HP. She wasn't really happy about that and proceeded to throw a piece of herself at Jupiter's lead Pokemon to take it out in one hit. Up next was Skuntank, which tried to lower my accuracy with a smoke screen, but Vark was already blinded by the burning rage inside of her, and so 2 more magnitude were enough to bring it home. The battle was won, but Jupiter too vanished in thin air, leaving me devoid of answers once again. My team was growing weaker with each and every level, and the next gym was quite a long journey from here. Luckily, Eterna City offered 2 solutions to slow down the evolution process. One can be found in this little apothecary right next to the Galactic Hideout. For as little as 800 Pokédollars, trainers can purchase energy roots, which do not only heal, but also have the secondary effect of lowering the consumer's friendship. By continuously feeding this healthy piece of vegetable to Pokemon like Golbat, Roserade, or Chimecho, they were guaranteed to always hate me, and with that, never evolve. The second tool I got access to was the Explorer Kit. It allows me to dig my way into a massive underground tunnel network where I can search for evolution stones, fossils, and other useful things. One of which is the Everstone, an item that if held by a Pokemon will completely prevent it from evolving. So I put on my helmet and went to work. It didn't take too long for me to eventually come across the unsuspicious looking stone. With that, I got everything I needed and could finally head towards the next gym, which also means that I added a few additional encounters to my team. The most important ones are Pamcham the Machamp from Route 211 and Emmy the Mr. Mime from Route 209. I also encountered a Honchkrow in the Lost Tower, but it didn't really want to stay in a ball, and so I was forced to sacrifice Rod to safely get it down to low health with Endeavor. Considering Work as a stone evolution, which means it can never evolve via level up, I was pretty happy with this trait. After fighting my way through way too many cities and trainers, including an easy rival battle against Dez in Hearthhome, I eventually arrived in Bellstone City. But now I reached a point where a lot of trainers started having second and third stage Pokemon. A good example for this is fighting type specialist Maylene and her unnecessarily strong Lucario. She's the first gym leader to have somewhat decent coverage, so I could not just throw Vark at her to solve all my problems for me. Luckily I had a decent amount of flying and psychic type Pokemon at my disposal, which should make earning the next batch a walk in the park. Let's see what Maylene had to say about that. She leads the battle with her Meditite as I send out Mitch. I outspeed and immediately went for a yawn before getting hit by a soft confusion. After lowering my opponent's attack with several growls, it eventually wakes up to recover from the stat drops by spamming Meditate. I went for a yawn and freely switched into work on the detect. A wing attack did enough damage to take Meditite out, which now brings in Machoke. It had a super effective Rock Tomb, so I went back into Mitch, who tanks the attack like a champ and outspeeds to connect with a yawn, all while my opponent only went for a Foresight. I wasn't sure if I should now switch back into work right away. Staying in seemed like the safer option, and so I got in some chip damage with Confusion before shrugging off the incoming Brick Break. With Machoke now asleep, Work was able to freely switch in once again and pick up another KO. There was only Lucario left. It immediately went for a Metal Claw, which unsurprisingly also raised its attack, before taking a big chunk of damage from a wing attack. A Citrus Berry unfortunately recovered way too much health, and since I wasn't going to risk one of my best Pokemon to crit, I went into Dark Souls. She wasn't fast enough, and so went down to 2 consecutive attacks without any impact on the battle, aside from giving Lucario some health back for free. I was confident Sat the Ponyta could at least get in some chip damage, but he decided to miss a Fire Spin, causing me to lose my second Pokemon without dealing any damage. Great. There was not a lot of space for error anymore, and so I sent out Tap. He at least quad resists Drain Punch, which means Lucario couldn't heal all the damage he takes back. Maylene went for the useless move regardless, as a wing attack brings her ace down to the yellow. On the next turn, Lucario missed a Metal Claw, as another attack left it with a Sliver. Since the gym leader hasn't used any of her Hyper Potions yet, she was almost guaranteed to use one now, and so I went for a Confuse Ray. That immediately paid off, as Lucario hits itself and gets its HP dropped to kill range by a wing attack. Crobat then tanked a Metal Claw, and from there, picked up my third badge with a final attack. Rowan must have gotten a little suspicious about me, because Lucas pretended Team Galactic stole his Pokedex. I decided to play along and helped him get it back. Unfortunately, this is also where Vark found her untimely demise due to a Giga Drain crit from a Beautifly. She was taken from us way too soon. I can still vividly remember her glorious victories over not only Rourke, but Mars and Jupiter as well. Rest in peace, legend. You will never be forgotten. Anyway, the next gym was only a city away, and while heading there, I picked up Noder the Gastrodon, Rel the Octillery, and Giraffaric the Giraffaric. Huh, I never noticed. With that, it was straight to Sir Gym Leader Crusher Wake. Similar to Maylene, I couldn't just sweep through him due to his team having decent coverage and a strong lead in ace Pokemon. Quagsire was also there. My main protagonist for this fight are Pachirisu, Octillery with an Everstone, and Roserade, which by the way, can only evolve during daytime. Oh, and Inu the Kricketot as switch fodder. Gyarados was out first, and so I sent out Sir Cap to hit a brutal discharge right away before tanking a bite. On the next turn, Wake healed his Pokemon back to almost full as I went for a charm to lower its attack just in case. I already knew I was faster, and so another discharge sealed the deal. Second was Quagsire, which immediately forced me to switch due to its ground type, and so I sent out Razor on a Tail Whip, which unfortunately also lowered his defense stat. A 4-time super effective Mega Drain then takes the silly Salamander out, which brings Wake's ace in last. With his lowered stats, Razor wasn't going to survive an Ice Fang, and so I went into Inu to fulfill her destiny. I could now safely send Roserade back in. She then proceeded to tank an Ice Fang like a trooper before hitting Floatzel down to a pixel of health. I really wasn't sure if Wake still had health pots here, and since I couldn't risk a potential late game Pokemon to a guess, I brought Drellin on a super potion. Octillery then tanked the pursuit before raising her crit chance with a focus energy. A Brine left her with slightly above half health as she hits a bullet seed. After another pursuit, throwing even more seeds was all it took to end the battle. That's the 4th batch. The next stop of my adventure is Celestic Town, but the road to get there was blocked by a group of Psyducks and their collective headache. A short trip to the Valor Lakefront together with my best friend Sam, who's also an avocado agent. A short trip to the Valor Lakefront together with my best friend Sam, who's also an undercover agent, leads me directly to Cynthia. She has heard of my Psyduck issue and hands me a secret potion to solve the problem immediately. From there, Fly brings me back to Solaceon Town, where I was able to move the group of ducklings out of the way right as Cynthia shows up. I mean, I'm just throwing out suggestions here, but maybe she could have just given them the medicine herself if she was going to show up no matter what. She then also has the audacity to ask me if I would be so kind to deliver a package to her grandma in Celestic Town. I don't know, are you going to show up a second after I deliver it? Well, you can't really deny the undefeated Sinnoh champion a favor, so up we go. At least the trip wasn't a complete waste, because Granny took some time out of her day to teach me everything about the history of this land. And when I say everything, I mean everything. 8 hours of history lessons later, and I finally got the chance to sneak out and head back to Hearthome City. I had already completed all the required story bits while passing through earlier, so beating Fantina was the only thing left for me to do here. By now I managed to collect a decent amount of Pokemon, making building a team against her frail ghosts an easy task. Miss Magus was actually the only thing I was slightly worried about, considering it had Magical Leaf to hit 3 of my Pokemon for super effective damage. But I already got some ways to play around that. Up first was Drift Blame, and I bring in Sir Cap to deal with it. A discharge did a little more than half before my opponent retaliates with an ominous wind. Since it luckily didn't result in an Omni Boost, a second discharge was enough to take it out. Cap has been doing an amazing job for these gym leaders so far. Fantina sends in her ace next as I switch into Lyra. Similar to Inu before, her only purpose is to allow me to freely switch into another Pokemon. Lyra absorbs a Shadow Ball on the switch, which could allow her to get off a yawn and actually help the rest of the team out immensely. But she decided that hitting herself in confusion twice in a row was a better way to go. This didn't interfere with my strategy too much, as I could now freely bring in work to tank 2 Magical Leaf and take Fantina's ace out with 2 Pursuit. Last was Gengar, but it kept spamming Spite, making it an easy target for my headed Crow. Things are moving pretty fast now, as the next city yet again is only 1 route away. I taught Surf to Noder, and with that was able to catch Catnet, the Tentacruel in Route 220. After defeating Des in Canalave, I wanted to get Byron out of the way as quickly as I could. Similar to his son, he's not really known for posing a big challenge. My concerns with his fight were not about his team, but about mine. You see, I only had 1 Everstone at my disposal, but needed to bring 5 Pokemon that would instantly evolve on level up. Noder was probably going to put in the most work here, so she had the honor of carrying the evolution protecting Pebble into battle. First up for Byron was Bronzor, as I sent out Catnet. The ring target barely managed to touch my squid with Extrasensory or Flash Cannon, and so I was able to slowly whittle it down with Bubble Beams, wasting a Hyper Potion in the process. Second for Byron was Bastiodon, and since it doesn't have any super effective moves, I decided to stay in. A Bubble Beam did a good amount of damage, as Bastiodon didn't even scratch Cat in return. On the next turn, another Bubble Bath brings the ace down to the yellow, as it returns the favor with an Ancient Power. A full restore then completely heals Bastiodon, but 2 more Bubble Beams got it back down to low health. It then continuously spent Rest and Ancient Power, which ultimately forced me to switch into Less to chip it down with a few Aqua Jets before it eventually woke up. In order to annoy me even more, Byron then went for an Iron Defense and another Rest, so Floatzel's physical attacks were now completely useless. I thought it didn't have to come to this, but now Noder had to join the battle after all. With Bastiodon still cozily napping around, I then set up a Rain Dance to boost my Water type attacks before eventually taking this unnecessarily annoying ace out. Last was Steelix, but it too stood no chance against my Gastrodon. See, I wasn't that far off. Nodar had to do most of the work after all. Byron was defeated, but I still felt like I was too weak to ever be able to confront Rowan and his Team Galactic Empire. Luckily, I wasn't alone in my endeavor. Des managed to convince the professor to let both of us join one of his secret meetings in the Canalave library. He mentioned something about blowing up lakes to get access to the toxic waste from the Fuego Ironworks to tame the god of time. I couldn't really follow the plan. Suddenly, the meeting gets interrupted with a huge explosion nearby. This is when Des and I realized that his plan was already in full motion, and if we can't stop him now, there might not be a second try. To even have a fighting chance and buff up my team significantly, I immediately rushed to the port and took the ferry to the Iron Islands. Deep down the mountain and away from prying eyes, I met up with Special Agent Riley, who hands me an egg for one of the strongest Pokemon available in this region. I then spent the better half of an hour to run around and hatch it, together with another egg I obtained earlier from Special Agent Wandering Man. Meet Jesse and Cole. Since I now had access to strength, I was able to pick up Craig, a fully evolved Garchomp, in this hidden entrance to the Wayward Cave. These three powerhouses are 100% going to be on my Elite Four team. Well, if nothing unexpected happens to them until then. So, back to the alternative plotline where Professor Rowan wants to take over the world. To stop him, I have to visit all three lakes of Sinnoh and make sure his grunts won't get the resources they needed. The explosion I felt back in the library seemed to have come from Lake Valor, so that was my first goal. Unfortunately, I came too late. The entire lake was drained. Magikarps were flopping around and gasping for air behind every corner. In an attempt to still interfere with their plans, I searched for the leader of this operation. I found him in a cave where authorities had been storing toxic waste for decades, but there were no barrels in sight. Work easily took out Commander Jupiter's entire team, but that wasn't going to change a thing. All I could do was to head to the other locations as quickly as possible and hope for the best. Lake Verity was the closest one, and I was able to stop Mars and Lucas before they could do any harm to this beautiful environment filled to the brim with poison-oozing barrels. Since Lucas is Rowan's second hand, then I also know all about Des and my operation. He mentioned he would head to Lake Acuity, and since they were onto us, I had to head there as fast as I possibly could to save him. If you haven't noticed yet, this is where I really started leaning into this Rowan is bad thing. I fought through endless fields of tall grass, fog-filled caves, and mountains covered in raging hailstorms. I eventually made it all the way there. But this journey wasn't without sacrifice. While I did manage to catch once a MOBA, the Abomasnow, the next route wasn't going to be as forgiving because that was where I ran into a wild Crobat. I was leading with Pan because of all the ice types in the area, and after failing to run, it hit my starter for way too much damage. I had to switch into another Pokemon to safely attempt another escape. My choice fell on Work as he gets nailed by a mean look, forcing me to either win the battle or lose one of my most valuable Pokemon. I went for a wing attack, but Crobat did way too much damage. I desperately tried to run, but Work's time had come. He did enough damage for Sakap to pick up the KO, but the damage was done. Upon arriving in Snowpoint City, I buried my fallen comrade's body and immediately headed over to Route 217 to sacrifice one Samoba to the Great Gods and pick up Elif the Weavile as a replacement for Work. He has a terrible move pool, but can only evolve while holding a Razor Claw, which together with his high speed and attack, makes him a decent Pokemon for this challenge. This finally brings me to the 7th gym. Candice and her ice types are usually not a big deal in this game, as 3 of her Pokemon have a 4 times weakness to very common types. I put together a team that should be able to get through this, and also had some space for Death Fodder just in case. The only thing standing between me and Des was this unnecessarily long ice puzzle that I definitely didn't struggle with whatsoever. I just love how the hardest part in every Nuzlocke challenge I did so far were the puzzles that were designed to be solved by 10-year-olds. I eventually got the hang of it, so let's earn another badge. Candice starts the battle off with Snower and says something about fitting these snowballs in my bag or something. I wasn't really listening. As mentioned before, her lead Pokemon is 4 times weak to fire, so a single Flame Wheel takes it out immediately. The gym leader for some reason brings out her Abomasnow next, which actually survives an attack on 1 HP before retaliating with an Avalanche. Lucky for me, my opponent's berry recovered enough health for it to be out of guaranteed healing range, and with that, a Grassy Giant goes down to another hit. Next was Sneasel, so I switched into Pancham to tank the incoming Avalanche and a following Slash, before sending Candice's 3rd Pokemon back to its Pokeball. Last came Medicham, and since I wasn't sure if Machamp could handle this, I went into Vonu to pivot into a better option. It actually got in a decent amount of damage with Hidden Power before going down, which then allowed Rep the Wingull to come in, survive a Force Palm on 1 HP, break through the paralysis, and crit Candice's last Pokemon out of existence. I know I never mentioned picking those 2 up, but they were supposed to die in this fight and came in clutch instead, so props to them. After tearing the badge out of Candace's hands, I ran to the nearby lake only to find my friend crushed by Jupiter's team. She mumbled something about meeting her leader in the Veilstone headquarters, so naturally, that was where I headed next. The puzzle pieces all started falling into place. I fought my way through countless grunts and ultimately ended up freeing these 3 mutated chinklings that Team Galactic found at the lakes. Apparently they were imprisoned with the toxic wastes to guard it and over time ascended into godly beings. Saturn then told me I was already too late and that his leader Cyrus was marching towards the Temple of Sinnoh to summon the Yelga. If Rowan could get hold of the God of Time, nothing and no one could revert what he had done to this region and probably will do to the rest of the world. It was my duty to stop him. Once again, I fought my way through raging storms and eventually reached the top of Mount Coronet. The summoning ritual was almost complete and time was running out. Both Commander Mars and Jupiter were blocking me from reaching Cyrus. I thought I had to take them on all my own, but in the last second, Des joins me and evens the odds. It's time for the trademark misplay of the run. Buckle up, this is going to be a wild one. Both commanders lead the battle with a Bronzor, as Des and I brought out Pamcham and Munchlax. Oh, on a very unimportant side note, I somehow forgot to heal my party because I assumed my rival would do that before the fight, so yeah. The power of friendship had to work overtime today. I was out of cross-chop PP and so I went for a Rock Smash into one of the Bronzor for a decent amount of damage before they target down Munchlax with their extra sensory for little to no effect. Since Des decided to screech Jupiter's ring target, I was able to immediately take it out on the next turn. She brought out her Golbat next and so I switched into Rel, who was my only other Pokemon with enough HP to fight. The best way to win from here is to basically ignore Bronzor because of its low damage and supportive moveset. That said, Rel immediately gets nailed with a Confuse Ray after bringing Golbat into the yellow with an Aurora Beam. Octillery was able to get in a decent amount of hits, while Munchlax kept both of our opposing Pokemon busy. The bat eventually goes down, which brings out Jupiter's Ace next. Unfortunately, Octillery hits itself in confusion with its floppy limbs way too many times, meaning Skuntank can easily pick up a KO. From here, my only option to get out of this dire position was to bring Machamp back in and hope for Des to turn on his champion AI. Lady Luck struck once again as Jupiter decided to take out Munchlax, allowing me to hit a free Rock Smash. Next up for Des was the Raptor, who put in a ton of work by taking out Skuntank, making it a 2v1 for the rest of the battle. Knowing Bronzor was destined to go down this turn, I brought out Emmy to potentially help out with the incoming Golbat. Unfortunately, Mars read me like a book and sent in her Ace Perugly instead, which immediately gives the Raptor a free ticket to the Poké Center. I used this to set up a substitute as Des brings out his Heracross. Since the Chunky Cat decided to go for a Shadow Claw instead of hitting a 4x effective Aerial Ace, it too gets deleted by a Brick Break and Psychic double up. The final hurdle in this battle was Golbat, so I brought out Elif to tank the incoming bite. From there, it was only a matter of clicking Icy Wind a few more times and this unnecessarily difficult battle was over. I had to rely on Des picking the right moves and targets so many times in this battle, it feels like I don't even deserve to win this. Failing to double check the game's documentation and not healing my team here is by far the biggest misplay of the run. While I struggled to keep my team alive, Cyrus managed to fully summon the Dialga, which forces me directly into the final Team Galactic battle. Luckily, I got fully healed this time around, so let's see if my party got what it takes to bring this one home. I can't stop the Professor just yet, but I can at least stop his main henchman. Cyrus' team consists of fast but frail Dark and Flying type Pokemon, so if I play carefully, this should be over in no time. Rowan's army goes down now or never. First up was Pamcham into the Galactic leader's PointCrow. Instead of a super effective Drill Pack, the bird went for a soft Steel Wing. Since I got cross-chop back, I immediately retaliate and bring my headed foe's health down to a sliver. Cyrus was forced to heal now, allowing me to send in Sir Cap to finish PointCrow with a discharge. Since my little mouse is weak to Earthquake, this baits Gyarados out next, but to no one's surprise, the lanky Pool Noodle too falls to a single attack. Weavile came out third, so I switched Cap out for Elif to tank the incoming Ice Punch. This means I could now switch into Call to shrug off a Night Slash for some reason. Lucario then proceeded to survive a Break Break on 6 HP before KOing Weavile with a close combat. Last for Cyrus was Crobat, and since there was no way I could do anything on this health, I brought my savior Cap back onto the battlefield. He tanks a Bite and Cross Poison crit before paralyzing the bat with a discharge in return. Since my Pachirisu was so low, there was no way of predicting Cyrus' next move here. I took the risk and went into Emmy, only for her to get bit into the yellow. But Cap's paralysis came in handy, allowing me to outspeed and hit a Psychic for a clean win. That's it. Team Galactic was defeated, and they vanished without a single trace. Right as I thought the chaos was over, both Lucas and Rowan showed up to collect what they believed was rightfully theirs. Before they could make a move, I turned around, ran towards the Elga, and threw the Master Ball at it. The God of Time was now under my control. But for the sake of this challenge, going back in time and changing the events that led up to this had to wait just a little longer. This region still had an undefeated gym leader with a god complex waiting for me. I quickly made my way to Sunyshore City to take on Faulkner and his somewhat electric type team. No wonder he's friends with Flint. They both have no idea what Pokemon types are. Oh, and if you're wondering where Cull is, by the way, well, you know how some Nuzlockers have this NPC that ruined one of their runs and killed their favorite Pokemon, and as a result they declared eternal war against them? For me, that honorable place goes to Sailor Luther. Not because of his Feebas or Machoke, no, because of his silly little Gastrodon that didn't want to die to a close combat and as a punishment for my hubris, took Cull's life in return. To be fair, it wasn't a rain, close combat lowered my defenses, and I could have just checked what Pokemon he has, but we're gonna ignore all of that because that would mean I made a mistake and we can't have that. After taking everything from Luther, including his godless abomination of a sea snail, it was time to plan for the 8th gym. I sacrificed so many friends to get here that my options for team building were looking kinda dire. Luckily, right after the 3rd gym, I picked up Wop the Hippowdon in the Maniac Tunnel. Since I potentially needed Wop for later battles, I gave my Eviolite to her. I then wasn't paying attention while fighting a random gym trainer and switched in Pamcham, causing him to level up and evolve right away. Fortunately, he's still strong enough to be on my gym team though. With that, my group of tiny evolution-resistant friends and I approached the gym leader and challenged him to earn the final badge. Faulkner starts off with his Raichu, who sets up a light screen before Wop one-shots the poster child's bigger brother with an Earthquake. Next up was Octillery, and this thing was a real threat to my team. It had moves to hit every Pokemon in my team for at least neutral damage. There wasn't really a safe switch, and so I risked getting hit by an Aurora Beam and went into Razor, who easily shrugs off a Bullet Seed instead. A Mega Drain then recovered some health, while the Octopus keeps rapid-firing seeds at my Pokemon. On the next turn, a Magical Leaf was enough to bring Octillery down to the red, as its Octazooka barely touches me in return. After recovering some health with Mega Drain into a Hyper Potion, the light screen ran out, allowing me to pick up the KO with a Magical Leaf. Up next was the Electric type Ambipom, which doesn't even have an attacking move, and so I brought out Pamcham on a nasty plot. I was worried it would go for a Baton Pass and transfer all its stats to Luxray, but the silly little monkey went for an Agility instead, meaning it just falls to a single Cross Chop. Speaking of big scary Thundercats that almost exclusively carry electric type moves, here is Faulkner's ace. I could easily send Wop back onto the battlefield, but decided to stay in for now to deal as much damage as possible. A Cross Chop brings Luxray low enough to activate its berry before it retaliates with a Charge Beam, which also hits the roll for a special attack boost. My time of being cocky was over. I switched in Wop on a Crunch. At this point, Faulkner is throwing the battle on purpose. Since the last Crunch was a crit, I knew I could easily survive another, allowing me to safely go for an Earthquake and take out the gym leader's final Pokemon. With all the 8 Sinnoh badges in my possession, there was only one more goal to reach. I made my way through Victory Road, and while most things went well, I had to make even more sacrifices to reach my destination. Amongst the fallen, Sir Cap. He was with us since the very beginning, and carried me through so many battles. I hope he and the other legends of this journey can watch over a glorious victory today. With that, the only thing standing between me and the final gauntlet was my old pal Des. While he was a pushover for most of the playthrough, what happened at Spear Pillar gave him enough confidence to fill his team with the strongest Pokemon this region had to offer. But I came prepared as well. Since I still needed someone to fill Sir Cap's spot, I backtracked all the way to the Pokemon Mansion to steal Chair the Raichu. On top of that, I also remembered that I forgot quite an important thing in Snowpoint. I caught a Meditite much earlier in the run, and there was an infamous NPC in the Frosty City who wants exactly that in return for a Haunter holding an Everstone. While this trade is as cruel as they come for regular players, it gives me the option to have a second Pokemon on my team that otherwise would be threatened to becoming weaker as soon as it levels up. I went through with the trade and assembled the strongest team I could. Let's see if Des got what it takes to beat me. First up was Staraptor, as I brought out Chair for her debut battle. She was holding Wise Glasses, so a single Thunderbolt was all it took to snipe the Emo Bird out of the sky. This brings out Torterra next. I was sure it would go for an Earthquake and brought out Soda, only for me to get read like a book once again and get hit by a Crunch instead. Luckily that didn't do any damage whatsoever, and so instead of going for the intended Ice Fang, I went for a Dragon Dance, boosting my speed and attack. Torterra then hits a strong Leaf Storm, forcing me to switch into the offensive. On the next turn, Ice Fang luckily connects, taking the World Turtle out in a single bite. This brings Heracross out third. I wasn't sure if I had enough damage to kill, and so I switched into Leeds the Onix, only for him to get KO'd in one hit by a close combat. Back to Soda it was, because it was pretty much the only thing on my team that could fight this Maniac Beetle in a 1v1. As predicted, Heracross outspeeds, but it most likely didn't see a kill just yet and only went for an aerial ace, allowing me to bring it down to low health with a waterfall. Against my better judgment and in hopes Des would be as silly as always, I went for a greedy Dragon Dance. This play, that should have never worked out by the way, actually paid off as Des misses a 90% Rock Slide. With my pool noodle back on track, 3 waterfalls were enough to KO both Heracross and the following Rapidash. 5th came Snorlax, which Pam was able to take out with a few cross chops and vital throws. This leaves Des with only his Floatzel left on the board. Pam wasn't in the best shape, but since my pivot option was already dead, I decided to stay in. He tanked an Ice Fang before chopping the other to what must have been 1 HP. I let one of my oldest companions go down to safely bring out Chair and finish Des' last Pokemon with a quick attack. The final 5 battles of this run were waiting for me. All that was left to do was to choose 6 Pokemon that could bring me to the end. After carefully considering all my options, I ultimately ended up with the following Pokemon, some of which were safely stored in a box only to preserve them for this very moment. Craig, Soda, Razor, Jess, Emmy, and Ellie. With everything else out of the way, I presented my 8 badges and entered the gauntlet. Up first was Bug Specialist Aaron. He leads the battle with Dustox, and I matched them off with Craig. An Aerial Ace immediately deals a huge chunk of damage before Garchomp unfortunately gets poisoned by a Toxic. I usually would give him a Pecha Berry to prevent that, but for now he had to hold the Everstone to make sure I had a fighting chance. After a full restore, 2 more attacks took Aaron's lead out, which now directly brings us to his ace. An Earthquake was enough to pick up the KO on the Bearded Scorpion, and a 4 times effective Aerial Ace did the job on the falling Heracross. During all this, the poison continuously chipped away on Craig's HP, which now forced me to switch out. I chose to send out Gyarados into Vespiquen. From there, 3 more Ice Fangs were enough to take the Beehive and the following Beautifly out. Second was Bertha. She runs a mixed team of ground and rock type Pokemon, and I prepared the perfect answer to that. Welcome to Sweep City. I lead Soda into Quagsire, which is pretty much a setup Pokemon because it only knows Protect, Sandstorm, Dig, which can't hit me, and Double Team. This allowed me to freely set up 6 Dragon Dance, all while Quagsire was staring into its inevitable doom. Sandstorm slowly started chipping away on Soda's health, but it wasn't nearly enough to matter. After maxing out my speed and attack, it took my Seremi Dragon a total of 5 waterfalls to show Bertha what true power looks like. Third was Faulkner's best friend and fire-type specialist, Flint. I mean, I do understand Drifblim being a hot air balloon and Steelix being literally made out of steel, but what is Lopunny doing here? Oh, well, he brings out Rapidash as I lead with Craig once again. His fiery steed only went for a 2-turn Solar Beam, allowing me to freely Earthquake it right back into its Pokeball. Infernape quickly follows suit, which then brings in Lopunny next. Flint's attempt of persuading my Pokemon failed horribly, as a 3rd Earthquake takes the sexy bunny down to the yellow. It only retaliates with a weak Fire Punch, allowing me to take it out with a Dragon Claw right after. Up next for Flint was Drifblim, which turned out to be a bigger challenge than I thought. Despite being 6 levels higher, the balloon was tanky enough to live a crunch and immediately went for a double team. Flint then healed his Pokemon back to full, as another crunch connects and brings Drifblim back down to low health. Craig proceeded to miss 2 more crunches and gets hit into the yellow before finally connecting and ripping Drifblim to shreds. Last was Steelix. Since Garchomp's health and my chances of killing this thing were equally low, I went into Soda once more. She goes for a substitute right away, and despite setting up a sunny day on the Switch, Steelix Fire Fang wasn't enough to break through my defenses. This then allowed me to set up 3 Dragon Dances, ultimately KOing Flint's final Pokemon with a Waterfall. There was 1 more to go. The last of the Elite 4 was Lucian. Similar to Bertha, he leads the battle with a setup, and I had just the Pokemon to abuse that. I bring out Ellie, and Mr. Mime's only answer to that was hitting a Thunderbolt or setting up screens to lower my damage for a few turns. I immediately started setting up with Sword Stance as the tiny clown went for a light screen. Pretty smart, considering I literally had a physical sweeper on the field. With my boosted attack, I then took out Mr. Mime and Medicham right after. Third was Bronzong. It's a pretty tanky Pokemon, so a Night Slash wasn't enough to kill, and instead of retaliating with an Earthquake or Gyro Ball, Lucian decided to set up with a Calm Mind instead. This raises his special attack and special defense, which once again is a pretty solid strategy, considering he can only hit me with physical moves, and I still had my physical sweeper standing right in front of him. Despite recovering half of its health with a berry, another Night Slash was all it took to take the Church Bell back to town. Lucian's last Pokemon were his Alakazam and Girafarig, but both stood no chance against Ellie's insane damage. This leaves only Cynthia left to beat, the champion of Sinnoh, the lady that had me run errands before taunting me by literally showing up right after. Both of the Everstones were not needed anymore because this is literally the last battle of the challenge. I gave Soda a Mystic Water as well as a Soft Sand to Craig. With that, I took the final elevator to enter the arena and earn my rightful title as champion. Let's see if this region has a single trainer that can stop me. Spiritomb was up first. I brought out Ellie to set up a sword stance, as Cynthia only retaliates with a resisted Dark Pulse instead of hitting me with a super effective Silver Wind. I wanted to see how far I could take this and went for another setup, all while Spiritomb still tries its best to throw the battle. Triple the attack was probably enough to win this entire battle, and so I went for a critical hit Night Slash to finish my opponent's lead Pokemon. Lucario was out next, and Greed got the better of me once again, as I went for a 4 times resisted Night Slash, which barely tickles Lucario, allowing it to take out Ellie with an Earthquake in return. I could swear I have seen this one before. Emmy was out next and proceeded to tank an Earthquake like a gamer before hitting a hard Psychic. That wasn't as bad as it looks, because Cynthia was certainly going to heal next, allowing me to at least get in some chip damage. Predicting an Earthquake, I brought out Gyarados to tank a Psychic instead. That makes no sense because Emmy would just resist that. I have no idea what happened to the Elite Four, but they all seem like they have a bet going on of who can throw a battle in the most creative way. After shrugging off a weak Aura Sphere, a Waterfall takes the Lucario out and brings in this Satanic Slug third. Soda didn't really have a decent way of hitting it, so it was straight into Razor on a Sludge Bomb. On the next turn, a 4 times effective Mega Drain unfortunately only brings Gastrodon to the yellow, meaning it can retaliate with an Earthquake. Luckily, Razor also hangs on, allowing it to crit Gastrodon straight back to hell. Cynthia then decided to send out Roserade next, and since I still needed Razor for my Milotic, I immediately swapped him out for Soda. An Energy and Shadow Ball leave her on 1 HP before she connects with an Ice Fang, evening the odds. Another attack took the Rose back to the red after a full restore, which means it was time to switch out. With her massive HP and special defense, Jess is pretty much untouchable by Roserade's moveset and slowly takes her opponent out with a Grass Knot and a Shadow Ball. With that, there were only 2 more Pokemon left to beat. The first of which was Cynthia's ace Garchomp. Like Roserade, I would much rather preserve Jess for the Milotic, and so I went into Soda to reset tempo. But Garchomp missed not only 1, but 2 attacks, which means Gyarados was able to bring it down to the yellow with an Ice Fang before inevitably going down to a Giga Impact. I sent out Craig, and since Garchomp had to recharge, it was an easy feast for my Landshark. Milotic was the champion's only hope for a victory. A Dragon Claw did about 50%, as Cynthia went for a Mirror Coat. That obviously missed because it only reflects special moves, and I once again had a physical attacker on the board. Another attack left Milotic with a Sliver before an Ice Beam takes my beloved Dragon out. I went into Emmy for a Shockwave on a full restore, but it barely managed to scratch the Serpent, and so I swapped her out for Jess. She easily tanked all the incoming Surfs and Ice Beams, and eventually took Cynthia's last Pokemon out with a Grass Knot. As a final reward, Soda also decided to return to its purest form and evolved into a Magikarp right after the battle. And that's it. I managed to beat a Hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Diamond with all of my Pokemon evolving backwards. I had so much fun playing through this and coming up with strategies to keep my team as strong as possible. The best part was that I had to start planning for the Elite Four the second I got my first encounters. A big shout out to everyone who keeps watching my videos. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. It goes a long way. Thanks for watching.